Vision across social media platforms, as well as our Storm Center app. If you don't already have the app, be sure to download it. We continue to provide you all the updates, not only in the studio with Kevin McKay, Kabir, as well as myself, but through the scattered across Atlantic Canada, where the impacts have been widely felt. Kevin, we're looking at satellite imagery. Before we dive into the actual graphics, however, I do want to give some visuals to all of our audiences watching, because one area in particular, Ile de la Madeleine in Quebec, has been suffering from major flooding. The significant surf, the wave heights, the storm surge has completely shut down roads. Again, travel not recommended. Everyone should be seeking shelter indoors. But this was shot by our very own team field member, Patrick, and he continues to report live from the field. We'll touch base with him throughout the program. But let's dive into everything Fiona related, Kevin, because it has already made quote unquote landfall across eastern Nova Scotia. Let's walk everyone through the actual satellite imagery, the current wind speeds, the current status of this post-tropical cyclone.
Yeah, so let's have a look at our current satellite here. So we don't have an eye anymore, like a well-organized hurricane, but for all intents and purposes, it's basically over Ile de la Madeleine right now. It's already moved past Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia, you're on the back nine of the storm. Now we still have our hurricane watches and warnings in place for much of the Gulf shores, and our storm surge warnings extending right out to the South Avalon. Now, the storm surge has been a big concern, especially actually in Newfoundland, and this is all because we are now about an hour and a half removed from high tide. We had the storm surge, we had the high tide, we had the waves, and we had the winds all working together. So first I just want to show you the last couple of hours for our wave heights, and these really bright pinks, that's over 14 meters. These are some waves have actually been measured, not even a model prediction. These have been measured at over 46 feet. So that's probably the best way for people to put that into perspective. When you think of a transport truck's trailer is 53 feet, this is almost as high as a transport truck trailer, and this has created some incredible devastation. Now, inland, you obviously don't have to worry about the storm surge, but the winds, lots of records have been broken, and a couple have actually been over 160 kilometers per hour, and there is one unofficial report of 179 on the north side of Nova Scotia. So right now, Nova Scotia, you have the bragging rights. I don't know if you want those bragging rights, but it looks like, especially Nova Scotia, your strongest winds are in the rearview mirror. PEI, if you haven't reached your max, you're going to do it in the next couple of hours. Yeah, so a lot of areas have been dealing with the oppressive wave heights, the flooding, again, the storm surge. It's been a historic storm altogether, Kevin, when it comes to the wind speeds. Many stations reporting the windiest September day on record, or at least tying really close or topping the records when it comes to the winds. Flooding rains have been an issue, also a drop in barometric pressure. We're going to be getting into all of that, but let's actually dive into the actual landfall, because we talk a lot about landfalls when we're dealing with tropical cyclones. There's a couple of caveats here. Again, it's not actually considered a true hurricane, or at least it wasn't considered a true hurricane when it did move onshore. Yeah, so it's a little confusing, even for us. It was classified as post-tropical, so it lost some of its hurricane characteristics, but that doesn't mean it was below hurricane strength in terms of the wind speed. So we did still have landfall at about 4 a.m. this morning right over the station on Hart Island, which is on the mainland Nova Scotia, not on Cape Breton, and that is where they recorded the lowest all-time pressure in Canada of 931. Now, that's not the unofficial number. It has to be, there has to be some adjustments done to it to get it right down to the base, which is everything goes back to sea level. So with those rough adjustments, it's still about 932, and that is absolutely destroying the previous record from St. Anthony, just a little up the coast. And this is
lot to do with why the winds are so strong and why the power outages have been so devastating. Look at that PEI. You still haven't had the second half of the storm, and you're already 95% without power.
Wow, I mean, most of the island without power, these winds working together with the amount of saturation of the soil. So the ground has been soaked by the rain that we picked up yesterday, which has caused several trees to be uprooted. So devastating impacts, again, with Fiona, or at least the remnants of this post-tropical cyclone. It continues to move its way onshore. There's a look at the previous, again, maybe 10 hours on satellite imagery as it pushes further onshore. And again, Kevin, we've been live tracking this all through, again, yesterday around that dinner hour through the overnight, because out ahead of landfall is technically where we start to see a lot of the worst impacts when it comes to the very, very strong winds, when it comes to the heavy outer band rains associated with this. So Mark Robinson, Jacqueline Whittle, they were all out through the overnight hours, even Nathan Coleman. But I do want to throw it to Patrick, because he was in, again, Ile de la Madeleine in Quebec, and he did clock in some historic wind gusts. He was able to actually record those for us and really report on the impacts. Take a look at this.
Here on the Magdalene Island, the winds are really picking up. We have recorded gusts well over 100 kilometers an hour. Actually, the biggest one was 132 kilometers an hour, which ties the all-time record for Magdalene Island. As you can see behind me now, the sea is rising and starting to cover the roads with debris and water. It's going to be flooding pretty soon. The problem also is that it's going to be conditions like that for the next 6 to 8 hours. So problems going to tumble more and more over the next hours.
Yeah, so that is one island that's in Quebec. The other island that's had a lot of attention is Sable Island. Now, it's not known for its populations of people, it's known for its population of horses, and there's actually been a pretty good community that's been worrying about the horses, and I'm part of that community, and that is Sable Island, just that little white line just in the bottom right of your screen there. Now, the eye of Fiona passed just to the west, which is almost a worst case scenario, because if you're on the eastern side of the eye, that's when you get the strongest winds, you get the biggest storm surge and the biggest waves. Now, Sable Island has a max elevation of 30 meters, and we were expecting a 15 to 20 meter waves plus the storm surge. So we have about 500 horses on the islands that are all going to be playing King of the Hill there to try to get into those higher dunes. So we'll have to get, hopefully tomorrow we'll have an update on the horse situation on the island. But this is a great satellite image of the structure of Fiona as it moved towards land. Now, since this was through the overnight hours, we had to use the infrared instead of the visible. But when we look at the current status, this is much more clear. This is the visible satellite right now. And you can see if you're into central Newfoundland, Gander, Grand Falls, you might actually have some peaks of sun. While if you're over towards the Rec House and Port aux Basques area, it is complete devastation. We actually have mandatory evacuations, and I don't think I've ever seen mandatory evacuations in Canada aside from forest fires, but we've had some extraordinary devastation with even some fishing communities with the storm surge and the waves getting completely swept off the rocks.
Yeah, it goes into the high tide, the wave heights, the winds, they're all kind of combining, and that's why we've been seeing some devastating impacts in this area across southwestern Newfoundland. On your screen right now, you're starting to see some visuals, at least earlier this morning, what it did look like in Halifax. Again, this is an area that was a little bit further to the west of the orientation as Fiona pushed onshore, making it a little bit less impactful for areas like Halifax. However, the widespread power outage is still a major concern there. I do want to, since we're on that note, Kevin, I do want to give a quick update. There's over 1,100 without power now in Newfoundland, so you could start to see the strongest winds, the storm surge, the wave heights really reducing and cutting out power to many in the southwestern edge of the island at least. And again, this has been a historic event because because of the sustained winds, because of the central pressure drop, a lot of things working together, it's been quite the unusual tropical cyclone. And I mean, that kind of ties into the whole idea of the warm sea surface temperatures. You know, Kevin, we talk a lot about the warm waters feeding these hurricanes, feeding these tropical cyclones. We know they all originate down south, where the warm temperatures are certainly there. We know naturally that temperatures cool, especially the further north you move across the ocean. But what is unusual about what has been happening in the North Atlantic?
Well, it's this has been an ongoing story for probably the last month. If you've been keeping up to date in Atlantic Canada with some of our historic stats, basically since August, Tyler Hamilton was the first one to discover this, that parts of Newfoundland had their warmest summer on record, and that was all thanks to some historically warm waters in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and around the coast of all of Atlantic Canada. Now, this is a little animation over the last 30 days, and those really bright pinks, that's about 3 to 5 degrees above normal. Now, when you think of air temperatures 3 to 5 degrees above normal, that's not really a big deal, but the amount of energy that has to go into warming up water, that is incredibly impressive for water to be that much away from where it should be. Now, over the last couple of weeks, you can see the pinks are really fading around Newfoundland, and that's good news in terms of not wanting the strong storms. But the one area in that black circle near Halifax, that area has stayed very warm, and it is kind of a perfect storm ingredient that's exactly where Fiona tracks. So I was digging into some stats and some historical patterns, and normally with the normal sea surface temperatures, a hurricane will have to go through about 800 kilometers of water that's too cold to fuel hurricane development and sustain its growth. So that orange line, that's basically your boundary where you're going from feeding the hurricane to depleting the hurricane. But with that little patch of 3 and 4 degrees above normal, that has stretched that boundary almost up to Sable Island, and that allowed Fiona to only have to spend about 6 hours or about 400 kilometers over that cold water. So while the outer boundaries were being felt along the Nova Scotia shore Friday evening, the eye was still over the waters that was warm enough to be fueling the hurricane. So there is a little, some people might think that landfall means when you're first feeling the effects of the hurricane, but landfall is when the actual center of the storm hits land. So landfall was around 4 a.m. this morning, but the impacts were being felt as early as dinner time last night.
Yeah, hours and hours ahead of the actual landfall. And our very own Chris Scott, the head of meteorology, was here all through the overnight alongside Kim McDonald and Melinda Singh. They did a great job of really narrowing down the impacts as they were happening in real time. We also have Kabir. Kabir, you've been great with providing all these social media updates. They've been flooding through Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. All the comments, all the footage coming through our social media platforms, we're so grateful to receive. It really puts things into perspective of how much damage has been done with Fiona. Let's give a quick glimpse.
Jesse, we're going to be right back with our TV feed, so stay with us with live coverage. Now, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we could be expecting in terms of our social media. So right now, we're taking a look at Port aux Basques, and that's an area of concern because quite a bit of that storm surge has come in and impacted a number of homes, and that will always translate to quite a bit of destruction. Take a look at this, what one wave can do as it comes in, and look at the amount of destruction that just one wave will bring. So definitely something to take home, and Port aux Basques is trending right now on Twitter. So we are continuing, of course, to bring you a lot of coverage on that. So make sure to go ahead and check out what's going on there. It's quite alarming to see. And taking a look now as well here, let me just set my machine. There we go. So this is from Halifax this morning, where we got to see quite a bit of these vehicles destroyed. So shocking, really, what these strong winds have done. And now, Jesse and of course, Kevin, what can we expect in terms of winds? And Port aux Basques, of course, is in the southwestern part of Newfoundland. Is that the area that we're heading to with Fiona.
Yeah, it looks like the worst of the winds are yet to come, especially in that area. The wave heights continue to increase across that area as well, and you're pairing that with the winds rushing in and wrapping around what's left of Fiona. Some of these on your screen you're seeing are displayed in feet. These are the wave heights, Kevin, and they're going to continue to be an issue right until the evening hours. Is that right?
Yeah, so that little patch where you saw it didn't look like there was any waves. You could see the water right underneath. That means it's actually right off of our scale. We don't ever have to worry about waves this big in Canada, so we don't even have it on our legend. So that is a sign that that's kind of the worst that we're dealing with this morning. So between Burgeo and the Rec House area, that's where we have the biggest waves making impact on shore, and that was also coinciding with the high tide and the strongest winds, and that's why we've had the absolute complete destruction of some communities. That is going to likely be one of the biggest stories to take away from Fiona's entire impact, right from when it was making landfall in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Now, the good news, when we go towards the next high tide around that area, I want to give a lot of attention towards the Rec House area. Our next high tide isn't going to be until about 10 p.m. tonight and then 9 a.m. tomorrow. Now, they're a little higher of tides, but you're not going to be dealing with nearly the wave heights or the storm surge. So even though they have complete destruction in some of those communities like Burnt Island, we are seeing the worst of it definitely in the rearview mirror in terms of water levels.
Yeah, and you know, Kevin, we were just looking at some Lewisburg footage that Mark filed in from Halifax, Nova Scotia rather. The wave heights were rocking boats, rocking ferries along the coastal areas. It allowed for a lot of flooding to push onshore as well. So a lot of devastating impacts even being felt across Nova Scotia. So the wave heights have certainly been an issue widespread across all of the Atlantic coastlines. And also Jacqueline Woodall was reporting with us earlier this morning. If you missed out on that, the streets were flooded across Charlottetown because of these waves and because of the storm surge as well. Lots of trees being uprooted, as we mentioned as well. We'll have some visuals coming up shortly with that as well. Again, it looks like a lot of areas across eastern Nova Scotia, Kevin, have peaked early this morning out ahead of the actual landfall. And what you're looking at on your screen is exactly what we're speaking to in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. Again, a relatively flat area across the Atlantic region. Not a whole lot of protection or terrain to really block out or diminish those winds. And the massive trees in that community really, easily uprooted. But you could even put that in perspective and think about the force of the wind required to actually knock down and uproot those trees.
And think of the number of nor'easters that those trees have withstood. Some of those trees might even be 80, 100 years old. So they've been around a few blocks in terms of the storms. But yeah, this is a little different because we do have the full foliage. But even if you think back to Hurricane Juan, like that also went right over Charlottetown. Charlottetown was one of the hardest hit areas with that storm 19 years ago as well. So that tree withstood Juan, but it didn't withstand Fiona.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here because we've had such wet ground. We've had a lot of rainfall move through the area, completely saturated the soil. Doesn't take a whole lot of wind to really pick up and really create these damaging impacts there. So we will be joined by Jacqueline a little bit later throughout this live stream coverage because conditions have been changing ever so much across Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, across portions of eastern Nova Scotia. Mark has been out towards Lewisburg, where ongoing investigation, cleanup, all of that continues right through this weekend. We'll continue to give you live updates as they come. But let's take a quick look at what Mark was experiencing earlier this morning.
Down at the Lewisburg, the pier, down the dock area, and we were actually up on the pier doing some shots. It was relatively safe, not a problem. And then, almost out of nowhere, that happened. The surge is coming in. There has been that wind shift, so it's coming out of the south, and we've had a wind shift and that has brought the surge in. Actually, yeah, you can even see the surge coming in. The waves are overtopping the docks now. It's sort of making its way, and you can see the flooding beginning back here. There's a couple of trucks there. I mean, they're fine because they've got, you know, well above the water. They're not going to have a big problem. Our small car can't handle that. We got out of there as quickly as we could because we just do not want to be trapped by the surge, especially if you're out on the pier.
All right, surge does wonders when it comes to damage, significant damage being done along many coastlines. I want to put some numbers or give out some numbers when it comes to the rainfall totals because, you know, if you've been following us, we've been forecasting quite the range when it comes to rainfall totals. Anywhere between 100 to 200 plus millimeters of rainfall has been in your forecast if you were, say, situated in the city of Halifax out towards Sydney. Now, isolated amounts, Kevin, really become a concern when it comes to tropical systems because they carry and lift a whole lot of moisture. Some areas like Halifax, 85 millimeters of rain is what you've received, over 100 in New Glasgow, Sydney, 75 millimeters, if not more, locally higher amounts. Let's talk about what's to come. Is the heaviest rain done, or are we still concerned with some flash flooding or urban flooding?
Well, for Halifax, yes, the rain is basically done for you. You'll still get some showers here or there, but Charlottetown, New Glasgow, Antigonish, where we have the heaviest rainfall in Nova Scotia, you're still going to be looking at rain through the afternoon. In Cape Breton, you're definitely going to be having the heaviest rain, enhanced by the elevation there. So that's where you're still going to have a lot of the rivers will likely be destroying some of the banks. We'll have overland flooding, we'll have river flooding, and that will be continuing right through the next couple of hours because with all the moss and the in the higher elevations on the plateau, that is going to hold a lot of the moisture. Probably the initial 20-30 millimeters that we saw was probably all held in that groundwater. So now that it's saturated, it's going to be running out, and it's still going to continue to feed that moisture out over the next the next few days. So definitely keeping an eye on Cape Breton for the worst of the flooding, inland flooding, but the shoreline flooding and the coastal flooding, that is definitely a Nova Scotia or a PEI, Cape Breton, and a Newfoundland story.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of PEI, we are joined now by Jacqueline Whittle. Welcome back, Jacqueline. Hopefully you had a little bit of a break to dry and rest a little bit because you've been ongoing throughout the overnight. It's been a long 24, 36-hour stretch for you. Let's talk about the current conditions happening across Charlottetown right now.
Yes, hi guys. We went north basically, so we went up to where we would have liked to have chased the storm last night, but quite frankly it would have been so dark in this area that we wouldn't have been able to see much because there's not a lot in the way of street lights and it's just a very small town. So we're situated in Rustico. That's a town just north and west of Charlottetown on the North Shore. And I'll tell you, what a drive here. We saw a lot of trees down, of course, in Charlottetown. We've been showing you that all morning. But as we left town and went north, we saw trees down, but all situated in the same direction. And that's because as we got closer to the coast, we just kept seeing all the trees blown over from that constant north wind all night long, toppled over in the same direction. So we saw a lot of tree damage, organized tree damage as we got here. Then we started getting close to Rustico, another place called Oyster Bed, and we saw a lot more in the way of surge damage, more surge damage than we saw in Charlottetown, again, because of that persistent north wind that moved in on the North Shore. So even where I'm standing right now, guys, you can see that this is normally more of a pier, and there's some, it's almost like a marina or dock area for all of these fishing boats. Right now the fishing boats are secured, you can see with the fishing lines and the bumpers there, but all of this is not normally underwater. You can see lobster traps behind me, maybe you can see it a bit better over here. So this is a fishing village, obviously, charter fishing boats, a lot of tourism here. We've seen gift shops. There's another area that we can take you to later that is all also underwater due to storm surge. So last night, this area would have been just rocking with winds right along the shore.
And Jacqueline, you know, it's it's so not only elevation dependent, as we were talking about before, but also where you are across the island. I mean, all of Prince Edward Island, you're seeing different impacts depending on where you position yourself. Watching the track of Fiona over the past, say, 24 hours has been quite interesting. It was almost traveling pretty far north, pretty due north, or maybe a little bit to the northeast, and we really saw sustained winds impact Charlottetown. And I think you tweeted out something, Jacqueline, earlier about the potential of seeing over 100k wind speeds sustained for over 20 hours. So it's very persistent in that area. A lot has to do with, I mean, that ties into the fact that we've seen a lot of damage, a lot of the trees blown in one area. How does this match up to, say, a nor'easter impacting the same area?
Well, I mean, I would say it's very comparable. You know, again, that relentless northeast wind that usually moves into areas like, you know, PEI and parts of Nova Scotia. I mean, this was just that due north wind, so obviously we saw a lot in the way of storm surge. What I haven't done a ton of nor'easters in this particular area, but I have done a few in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. But what I can say that's really stood out to me today, Jesse, is the color of the ocean water in some of these inlets. And that's because PEI has a very red kind of clay. If you've ever been down to the state of Georgia, it's very red soil. That's how it is here. And along the shore, all of this red clay and dirt and sand and whatever else the ocean water is kicking up, it's like we're seeing orange waves coming through, and it's really quite fascinating. And we've been shooting a lot of it with our cameras, and we'll get that back to the network as soon as we can. But right now, I mean, it's kind of that clay color. You can see me, but it was really pronounced when we came in at first. And again, I think it's just churning up all of that natural soil that is on the coast. And of course, the bad news is that probably a lot of coastal erosion has been occurring as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that Patrick was talking about in the field as well. What I found so interesting this morning was him reporting from Ile de la Madeleine. I had no idea that they actually build these barriers of rock and pebbles and small stones to protect some communities from the storm surge, from the damaging wind gusts. But some areas that are completely left unprotected have devastating damage impacts being done there. Let's talk a little bit about what you could mention of the difference from waking up early this morning to now. Have you seen or experienced any sort of ease when it comes to the winds, when it comes to the rain? I know looking at radar right now, we're seeing a lot of drier air push in, some breaks in the heavy rainfall. But what about how the winds feel where you are?
Everything you just said, I agree with. We are seeing that break. Things are diminishing, especially the sustained winds. But then all of a sudden, you'll get this gust mixing down, and it just about knocks you right off your feet. That's going to continue, and that's what's really going to continue to uproot trees, because everything's really saturated, and it's really the root systems that are holding these trees in the earth. And as the soil just becomes weaker and weaker, I think we could see more trees come down. But you know what I've seen different. You know what? It feels a lot colder to me. It feels drier, but it feels cold. Now that could be because I'm just wet, but also I just think that, you know, temperatures with that wind chill in some of these areas along the coast, I was reading, are feeling like about 6. That's what our app was saying. That's cold. That's getting into like winter chasing territory, right? I mean, It's 11 feeling like 6 or 10 feeling like 6. Well, you know, we've got raincoats on, and you get it just chills you, especially with the wetness. But anyway, enough complaining for me. I'm in my glory out here, as you know.
Of course, Jacqueline, thank you so much. Again, the next topic up for discussion is probably some snowfall coming to areas of the East Coast, because that is certainly a story. We'll check in with you very shortly. Jacqueline, thank you so much. Kevin, we've been talking a lot about this quote-unquote tropical snow. I know it's an unofficial term. It doesn't actually exist, or it's not an official term, but there's a lot of cooler air coming in and wrapping in behind the northwestern fringe of post-tropical cyclone Fiona. It's actually encountering a cooler air mass, a modified air mass, if you will, and some of this rainfall. I know you'll actually put on a little bit of a snow layer on our graphic here. is being picked up over the higher terrain across the far north. We're thinking some lower population centers of Labrador, and this will be an ongoing threat, I'd say, into our Sunday. So it's an ongoing story. Quite interesting because it's not every day that you see a tropical-like system bring snow to some areas across the region.
Yeah, so we don't. I know Jacqueline was saying we're getting a bit of a wind chill down in PEI, but it's not going to be the wind chill that's going to lead to any snow situation down that far south. But once we get up towards Labrador, that's where we're going to start to see the encroachment of that Arctic air. And I'm just going to try to find some snow influences here. So the reason being, this is all kind of thanks to the trough that if you're watching us from Ontario, even Quebec, 2 days ago we had that really windy north wind that dropped our temperatures. Well, that same front is what's running into Fiona today. So we do have this is kind of the leading edge of all that cold air that's coming in from the northwest, while Fiona, all its moisture is coming up on the east side, and that's all moisture that's coming all the way from the equatorial areas and even down around the Caribbean. So we're going to watch that moisture just run into that wall, and that wall is just going to sit right over inland Labrador. So you're getting those two air masses just basically running into each other. Neither of them wants to give up, and that's where we're going to see a bit of that transition to the snow by this afternoon, and then even into Sunday as Fiona really starts to lose her organization. We're going to see that snow still kind of linger for Shefferville. Not so much out towards the coast, so Nain doesn't really need to worry about it. But Labrador City, Happy Valley, Goose Bay. Labrador City is not totally unheard of. Every year you usually see about 2 days of snow in September. But a place like Happy Valley, it's only 1 day every 3 years. So we might not get it in Happy Valley just because you're right down at sea level, so you might stay happy in that valley. But
and
Labrador
not totally
City,
unheard of, right, Kevin? I mean, it's that time of year. We've already welcomed in some cooler, fresher air from the north, and it is going to continue to battle it out with the warmer air masses coming in from the south. And this is typical across the entire country. We've already seen some signs of early fall in Ontario and Quebec, a little bit of lake effect showers. So it's not only confined to Atlantic Canada. I mean, it is the time of year where we're getting these conflicting air masses. And when we're dealing with these different air masses and different pressure gradients, we get into very strong wind gusts. And I want to throw it over to Mark at what he experienced earlier. If you missed our live stream earlier, Mark was out trying to find his footing in Louisbourg, Nova Scotia. The winds were whipping around. Take a look at this.
Oh,
Wow.
The wind in the spring feels like needles. Like I'm getting up.
Absolutely
Jesse, I hope you can
incredible.
still hear me.
Yep, we can hear
Can
you,
you
Mark.
still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Again, I'm trying to get back into position. I apologize for that. It basically, once you start going, you almost can't stop.
And you could see the difference between the conditions where Mark was and Jacqueline. Jacqueline was, I mean, still dealing with sustained winds of up to 100K, but Mark was really in the thick of it earlier this morning.
So Mark isn't far from Sydney. So Sydney, the airport in Sydney reported a gust of 141, and it isn't getting the direct onshore flow, and there's a little elevation to protect it. So where Mark was, he might not have been measuring at the exact time, but if Sydney was 141, I'm thinking Mark might have been closer to the 160 mark, the mark for Mark earlier this morning. But yes, the winds are they're gonna remain strong through the afternoon, but he won't have to brace himself quite as hard as we go through the remainder of the day.
Yeah, and earlier this morning, the storm surge was just just absolutely incredible where he was. The streets were flooded with water. We have lots of visuals coming in through social media. So if you are in the region or if you have family, again, you don't want to be outdoors during this right through the rest of the day, really, because the wave heights, Kevin, continue to be an issue, especially across southwestern Newfoundland, where we have mandatory evacuations. We mentioned off the top of this live stream, that is the next area of interest and concern, major concern. Port aux Basques, portions of the Burgeo, we're dealing with significant surf, very dangerous waves, and very significant storm surge. We have footage from New Brunswick, and a lot of viewers were asking, do I need to cancel my flight in and through areas like Fredericton? They're very concerned about Fiona and the approach, and depending on where you're situated in New Brunswick, you were kind of dodging the worst of the worst, but along the eastern shorelines, you definitely got into some gusty winds, some damaging winds at times with Fiona, but certainly New Brunswick did not see the brunt of this one.
Yeah, if you're the Gulf Shores of New Brunswick, it was really the storm surge that was the most impactful there. So that was Bouctouche, which is right along the Gulf Shore. So it's not a Bay of Fundy story. St. John and Fredericton, not really worrying about it. But basically, if you combine these purples, which is anything over 10 meters, and you combine that with high tide, it doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter which ocean you're in, that is going to be some shoreline devastation. Now the good news, as the center Fiona goes through the Gulf and continues to weaken, by the time we get to overnight tonight and especially into Sunday morning, you can see the purples are gone, even those deep reds are gone. So by the time we get to Sunday morning, this is actually a westerly flow. So Burgeo, you're still going to see maybe 4 to 5 meter waves, but that will be much less than the 15 to 18 meter waves you saw. So again, I don't want to overlook the extreme devastation that we had in the Port aux Basques area over the last few hours, but we don't need to worry about any further damage with the next high tide in terms of the storm surge, but we'll still have to watch the winds. The winds will still be gusting over 100 kilometers an hour, likely until midnight along the southwest shores of Newfoundland.
Yeah, where storm surge was also a major concern across Quebec, and Patrick was out, and he now provides us with a new update. Take a look.
This is one of the problems that the people from the Magdalen Island have to go through because of Fiona, is that the sea is really, really, really strong. And as you can see, because there's have big erosion problems on the island, they have put all these dam of rocks. The sea is so strong and the waves are so hard that it literally moved all these rocks around, and it goes on this part of the road. Now this part of the road was closed on a distance of about 8-9 kilometers long because of all those rocks. To go through, you need to follow one of those boulder pusher, and that's the only way, and it's about 20 kilometers an hour because of that. So on a distance from 8 to 9 kilometers, the sea literally pick up the rocks, put it on the road, and it's become unusable. Now, the condition's going to be really, really hard still in the Magdalen Islands for another few hours. We had winds over 100 kilometers since last night, and still really, really strong as we speak. And as you can see, the sea is also really, really hard. I wouldn't want to go out today, let's say.
Okay, definitely not a day you want to be outdoors.
Not a beach day.
No, definitely not a beach day. Kevin, the Halifax area was previously under a hurricane warning. That has now dropped. Let's talk about the current alerts in place, and where do we need to be concerned about the most heading into the rest of our Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, so we can definitely break this up chronologically. For the next, I'll say 3 hours before we'll likely see the warnings get updated again. We're continuing to see those hurricane warnings dropping off. So this is the update that's coming through the current minute. So the shores of much of the western Gulf shores are being dropped, but PEI, probably through the next 2-3 hours, you're still going to have to deal with the worst of the conditions. And then the hurricane warnings for Newfoundland, we'll likely see that for a couple, maybe 4 or 5 hours on the other end. On the backside, of the hurricane warnings, once we see those, we aren't going to immediately go into kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. We're still going to have to likely deal with maybe some wind warnings, maybe some lingering storm surge warnings, because even with a strong fall storm, we do quite often have these storm surge warnings. So these will likely linger until the next high tide, which again is around 9 to 10 p.m., depending where you are across the Gulf. So I just want to do one more little wrap up here of the max wind gusts that we have had. We're still looking for some more unofficial readings from non-airport locations, non-official sites. But right now we are seeing reports upwards of 180 kilometers per hour, and that has given us some incredible visuals now that the sun has come up.
Yeah, and I mean, talk about historic storm. We've been mentioning this all through the week ahead of Fiona. You know, it's been the very first major hurricane of the Atlantic season. It was a 6-name storm. It was one to really watch as it headed towards slightly cooler waters, but it really deepened, Kevin. It reached one of the all-time lowest barometric pressures. I know to the general public, when we talk about barometric pressure, it could be fairly confusing, but it really goes hand in hand with the wind speeds that we get to squeeze out of certain storms. Nor'easters can be absolutely devastating when it comes to the winds. This one also quite historic in nature because of that central pressure drop, because of the record winds. A lot has to do with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ingredients that go into it, but this storm had all of them. You didn't forget the eggs, you didn't forget the flour and wonder what went wrong with this recipe. This was everything was perfect. The oven was heated perfectly in terms of the ocean, and this is why this is now the strongest storm ever recorded in Canada in terms of the pressure.
Wow, and you know, it's so interesting reporting live with Mark and Jacqueline and Patrick out in the field, even Nathan. They all had one thing to say about how historic and how memorable this storm will be going forward in Atlantic history. Let's take a look back.
Well, just another massive tree down here in Halifax. This is on Chebucto Road, and you can see how it was ripped here. And you know, this is going to be a loss for the homeowner here because it is right up, almost touching their house now. Thankfully, it didn't fall on top of the house, but just a massive tree, and you can see what the speed of the wind. It brought up even all the sod down here as well, and so it's going to take some time to clear that wood.
Here on the Magdalen Island, the winds are really picking up. We have recorded gusts well over 100 kilometers an hour. Actually, the biggest one was 132 kilometers an hour, which ties the all-time record for Magdalen Island. As you can see behind me now, the sea is rising and starting to cover the roads with debris, and water is going to be flooding pretty soon. The problem also is that it's going to be conditions like that for the next 6 to 8 hours. So problems going to tumble more and more over the next hours.
Well, I can tell you, what we're dealing with is a relentless storm here along the coast. We're expecting this to ramp down, the winds to die down a little bit, and they have not done that at all. I'm just getting taking a reading here. I just got, that's right there, there you go. That was 86 kilometers an hour, probably quite a bit higher than that. This anemometer tends to register about 20% below what the actual wind speed is. And the one thing that has sort of receded a little bit is the storm surge. So you can sort of see the surge back there on the shore. It's pushed up, up along the pier here in Lewisburg, and that has pulled back a bit. I think because the tide is going out, but the winds, especially along the shoreline, have not stopped.
So we are in downtown Charlottetown and now getting a look at some of the damage early morning here as the sun's starting, or daylight's occurring, not really sun, but you see quite a bit of tree damage here by this car. This is on one of the side streets. Lots of tree branches snapped, like this one here. You can see, but probably more damage, more impressive damage, if you will, is over here by this church. There's a lot of tree limbs down here, like just widespread all over the place here. And one of these trees actually was uprooted. Oh, I gotta be careful, there's some power lines. Yeah, power lines, gotta be very careful. But check this out. And I mean, this is kind of been all over the city, like completely uprooted tree here. There you go.
Wow, and just to put that in perspective, those trees are, some of them are over 100 years old. So you could think of the strength of these winds required to uproot these trees, displace them, throw around objects, debris, and damage homes. Absolutely significant when it comes to the sheer size and intensity of Fiona. Another area which unfortunately we did not have any field members out to was parts of Newfoundland, but now we shift focus and we really want to talk about the impacts there. We're showing you footage of portions of the South Shore and the southwestern quadrant of Newfoundland where the storm surge, Kevin, has been something to be very concerned about.
Yeah, that is one intimidating view. And yes, I was actually surprised the last few weeks how many videos we received from Newfoundland of just how quiet and sunny and beautiful it's been along the coastline, and this is more so what we're used to and then some. This is absolutely incredible. Mort, where that video was from, also Burnt Island has some incredible devastation, and Port aux Basques, that's where all the you take the ferry from Sydney up to Newfoundland. That's one of the major areas. And on this satellite image where you see little shades of green and the gray and the beiges, the gray and the beige, that is just bare rock. So a lot of these fishing communities, yes, they're really thought it out by building them in nestled in little coves and everything, but that's great to shelter you from the biggest waves and the strongest winds of just a normal day. But what it can also do, it can grab the storm surge and really funnel it in. Quite the same reason why the Bay of Fundy has the biggest tides on the planet. It's just because of the actual structure of the sea bottom and the bay there. So this can actually inhibit and make the matters even worse, and that's why we've seen some of these little fishing villages actually just swept right off the shore.
Very unfortunate situation unraveling across Newfoundland. I want to loop in Jacqueline Whittle. She has repositioned herself in Charlottetown. Jacqueline, let's talk about the current conditions. I'm not sure how much you've been following the situation ongoing in Newfoundland, but these waves and the storm surge has really been shifting further to the east, and it's been bringing devastating impacts to the region.
Yeah, I haven't been following it too much, just kind of based on what you guys have been saying and some tweets as well. But not to correct you, but I'm actually in Rustico, which is north of Charlottetown on the North Shore. The reason we came here, Jesse and Kevin, is that we wanted to see if there was some storm surge damage or storm surge evidence really from last night with those constant northerly winds, and exactly what we thought is exactly what's occurred. There's all kinds of charter fishing companies along this route that are really going to sustain some damage because of the surge. We have a lot of boats that have been secured down and made it through the storm. We actually, my cameraman Steve was just talking to a local boater who said he stayed with his boat all night, and no matter what, he was going to stay with it, and he did, and it's okay. So a lot of people are, very attached and passionate about their vessel. A lot of people, it's everything to them, and maybe they live on them and that sort of thing. So anyway, but looking around here, you can see deep sea fishing trips. This is a very popular tourist destination. We passed a place called Blue Mussel, and I put out a tweet about it being underwater because of storm surge damage, and I had so many responses like, no, that's my favorite place to go to on the whole island. And like, there's just a really, it's a somber kind of tone here with all this storm surge damage, because it's going to take a long time to clean a lot of this up. This is not normally all underwater. And I know I'm by a road here, but you can see beyond some of these fishing huts that it's all underwater, and that's not how it's supposed to look.
No, absolutely not, Jacqueline. And we have footage that you sent us from Rustico Beach. What you're looking at on your screen is just streets just over flooded with water, the storm surge, the wave heights, bringing devastating impacts. And Jacqueline mentioned almost the red or brown hue to the waters because of the clay sand. I mean, wow, this really paints a picture. Oyster red, the reddish hues of the water, just incredible. Never have I seen that in person. But I mean, for someone who's not from that area of Atlantic Canada, not familiar with those beaches, you almost wonder, oh my gosh, why does it have that hue? It's very interesting to see, Jacqueline.
Oh yeah, it totally took our breath away. Like, we were coming toward the coast and we were so focused on tree damage, and it's all we saw for, you know, kilometers and kilometers as we went north. But then as soon as we got a glimpse of the ocean, it was so different from what we saw in Charlottetown, you know? And it was, like I say, it really took our breath away. It was like, oh my gosh, it's orange. Like the water's orange, the waves are orange, the surge damage is orange. I've never seen that in a hurricane either. So that was really fascinating. But, you know, I can already tell you that there's a lot of coastal erosion going on, a lot of damage to the coast itself. I'm looking across the bay right now, and I mean, a lot of this has just been washed away.
Something we've been talking a lot about with Patrick earlier in Quebec was some of the barriers that the island put up. Is there anything in that area of Prince Edward Island, Jacqueline, that they have done to better prepare themselves or equip them and protect some of the coastlines?
Not that I've seen. You know, I think a lot of the focus was on boats, a lot of fishing vessels, a lot of pleasure craft. So not that I've seen in terms of properties. A lot of the properties are not, from what I'm seeing, directly on the shoreline. They're like across the street. Some are, but it looks like we're actually maybe having a battery issue with our camera here. I don't want to lose you, so just in case we do, this is what happens when you're out in the elements for many hours. But, you know, some of these areas are up on a little bit of a ledge, or like not a cliff, but maybe like a 20-foot ledge. So enough to break some of that ocean wave activity. But when I'm looking across here, I'm seeing a lot of dirt and clay. It's not rock. So anything that's been, you know, slamming into that sort of muddy cliff is also wearing away at that cliff. So, you know, this is the kind of stuff, I don't want to just, you know, jump right into like, okay, we can't blame one storm on climate change. We can't link it to climate change. But could we see more coastal erosion as we see more powerful storms? Yeah, I guess we could. And you know, is this one of these storms that we are going to look back in the records and remember the fact that, yeah, we saw the lowest pressure ever set in Canada? These are all record-breaking storms that at least make you think and make you reflect.
Absolutely, Jacqueline. Great point. We'll leave it there for now for you to charge up your batteries and maybe reposition yourself somewhere nearby. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll touch base once again throughout this live stream with you. That's Jacqueline Whittle from Rustico Beach. Thank you so much. Kevin, let's dive into the power outages. We have an outage tracker as we get into the rest of this morning and afternoon across the Maritimes. It's been significant.
Yeah, but I also want to be the bearer of some good news. Nova Scotia, we've actually had 11,000 customers coming back online.
Wow,
so,
that's great.
So they're already getting out there and starting to, at least around Halifax, I would think, they're trying to get some customers back online. But then on the other side, New Brunswick, you have, from the last time we updated this a couple hours ago, we've had another 5,000 customers go offline. So you win some, you lose some. And hopefully over the next 6 hours or so, we can start winning a little more than we lose.
That's great. I mean, and we're going to be starting to slowly see the winds diminish, especially across areas like Halifax through the major city centers of Nova Scotia. Those winds will continue to track further to the north and the east. as we progress through the afternoon, which is great news. I know a lot of our viewers have questions coming in about the timing. When can I expect power to be restored? When can I expect these winds to ease and the waves to diminish, depending on where you are? Kevin, let's talk a little bit about the timing and when you expect some key locales to really start to see improving conditions.
Yeah, so the South Gulf, anywhere from the Confederation Bridge over towards Cape Breton, the bottom end of Cape Breton, we've likely seen the worst of the winds in the rearview mirror now, especially also on the Atlantic side of Nova Scotia, with the exception of Cape Breton. Now, in terms of the improvement of the winds, that's going to gradually happen through the afternoon, and then it'll actually accelerate through the overnight in terms of how quickly they are going to die out. So we likely won't see too much in addition to the current power outages. But by the time we get to, again, midnight, that's when the wind gusts will be below 100 kilometers an hour. And in many areas, that's still very significant. But places like Western Newfoundland, your infrastructure is definitely built to withstand that. So that is some good news. And we've also seen on Twitter some reports of sightings of Quebec and Ontario power, like power trucks going out there to help out. So we're kind of returning the favor for all the times they've come to Ontario and Quebec for the ice storms. So hopefully a little more hands on deck. We'll get more areas, maybe even a day or two back online sooner than you would normally expect if you just had your power company.
Absolutely. And speaking of restoring power and power outages, what's coming through the social feeds, Kabir? Let's loop you back in.
Well, great to see you guys. And also, we've been live for quite a while, so you guys are doing great. I'm hearing all this information, and it's translating very well to social media. What you're saying really is taking place, and visually we can see now the path that Fiona has really forged with the destruction here, because we have an article out right now, Total Devastation in Newfoundland. Port au Basque is really in a situation, it's in a type of way that is quite alarming to see. So do encourage you to go ahead to our Twitter and take a look at that. But also, these are some scenes that we can see here from Newfoundland. We can see roads completely destroyed, side rails unable to stand up and withstand the winds and the water battering it. And this is from Jacqueline Whittle. This is actually her feed. This is what she has been posting. So incredible footage from the storm surge here, and you can see it getting in under these houses, causing widespread flooding. This water, it's interesting because we see these visuals, but the power of it goes so unnoticed compared to what it's actually doing. And if you think about it, all the electrical systems beneath homes, all of the plumbing, all of the structure is being affected by that. And so Prince Edward Island is really in a situation that needs quite a bit of assistance. And this is footage from Jacqueline that was just about an hour ago. And Mark Robinson showed us the power outages as well. So quite a bit going on there. Over 450,000 people, actually 545,000 people across Atlantic Canada currently without power as well. And that's more than Hurricane Dorian in 2019. It's the all-time largest power outage for Nova Scotia that's ever occurred. So the recovery, I guess, starts immediately. Jacqueline's out there, and she's mentioned, of course, that well, the wind gusts continue to come in kind of bouts. They kind of surprise you a bit. And I guess that will make the recovery very difficult. But in the coming days, we're going to see this situation continue to evolve. Now, question for you both, Jesse and Kevin, we're going to bring you back in here. So as we see this system now starting to, I guess, dissipate for parts of Atlantic, or parts of the Maritimes rather, moving towards Atlantic Canada, when are we going to start to see this calming down? When are we going to start to see this pull back? When can we go back to our normal lives?
I mean, the cleanup is going to be a prolonged event across all of Atlantic Canada, Kabir. It's been such a broad system, a far-reaching, very strong system. Kevin, you have a little bit of information when it comes to the water, when it comes to the storm surge, and the damage that the water has caused in general.
Yeah, what I'm really looking forward to in terms of the water is tomorrow, once the storm clears and the satellite is a little more clear, I'm looking forward to seeing how all that clayey water, the red water, the brown water, how it is picked up on the satellite around Nova Scotia and PEI, and we'll actually be able to see the currents and how the waves will carry that across the southern Gulf. So that could be a very interesting thing for tomorrow. But Kabir, you're asking when will people be able to return to their normal lives? Well, I think in Nova Scotia, people will be returning to it basically right away, because their normal life involves just helping everyone out. So I think the second those winds are dying down, even if you don't have a tree down, you'll be out there helping your neighbors. So it's kind of like how a nor'easter brings everyone together with their snowblowers. This will be bringing everyone together with their chainsaws.
Absolutely, such a strong and tight-knit community. It's great to see that. We have some visuals coming out of Nova Scotia from earlier this morning. Again, we've had a lot of the strongest impacts move in before sunrise. Wow, and some power outages, down power lines, and some sparks that you're seeing fly across the street. So again, power outages, downed trees, down power lines, as well as uprooted trees, all being a concern in that area, especially parts of Prince Edward Island. We've seen some heavy amounts of rain, but I mean, where is that heavy rain tracking? And are we expecting a lot of this rain to reach the populated areas of, say, eastern Newfoundland? Say I'm in St. John's or Gander. Is it a direct dodge from Fiona?
Well, it depends on your idea of a dodge. With St. John's, you have a pretty high standard for considering it a storm, and I don't think you're going to consider this a storm. You're going to avoid the worst of the rain for sure. We'll have a look at what your wind gusts have been in a second, but basically by maybe sunset tonight, Cape Breton is definitely going to be out of the heaviest rain. Just that elevation is really going to be kind of sucking every bit of moisture out of the bottom edge of the system as it can over the next 12 hours. But since it's over the colder water now, it's also not able to grab a lot more of that moisture, especially on the south side. So if I back it up here, you can see on the south side of the center there, down towards Sydney, watch it as we play it out through the afternoon. A lot of that is going to die out. That's just because it's not grabbing any of that moisture. But on the north side, there's still a lot of green there. So we started over again. You see there's not much of a change on the north side. And that's because that is all still the tropical moisture. And yes, it's cooling, but as it cools, that air mass is becoming more and more saturated, and that's why it can even withstand turning to snow. So Labrador, we're still going to have a lot of heavy rain right until Sunday. So through Sunday, we're going to actually turn our attention. It'll be still a Newfoundland story, but more so a Labrador event, and then a cleanup story in the Maritimes.
Wow, and speaking of tropical moisture and tropical systems, I asked Mark earlier this morning, which was actually quite entertaining, whether or not he preferred chasing these storms or nor'easters. I did ask him if it did feel more of a tropical-like air mass where he was in Louisbourg, Nova Scotia, and he said, you know what, it's not as bad as that classic nor'easter, but you know what, those waves and the storm surge were quite damaging. So take a look at this.
Well, I can tell you, what we're dealing with is a relentless storm here along the coast. We're expecting this to ramp down, the winds to die down a little bit, and they have not done that at all. I'm just getting taking a reading here. I just got, that's right there, there you go. That was 86 kilometers an hour, probably quite a bit higher than that. This anemometer tends to register about 20% below what the actual wind speed is. And the one thing that has sort of receded a little bit is the storm surge. So you can sort of see the surge back there on the shore. It's pushed up, up along the pier here in Louisbourg, and that has pulled back a bit. I think because the tide is going out, but the winds, especially along the shoreline, have not stopped. I actually saw there's a couple of chasers in town here, and they were up by the fortress, and it does look like there's a forest up there that has just been absolutely flat. We're going to go up and take a look at that later on, but you can see, like this, I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a storm in eastern Canada that just goes on and on like this. This feels much more like a tropical system, like when you're down on the Florida coast and it comes in, it's not moving very fast. That's what this feels like. The one big difference though, this is a lot colder. You know, these winds are very cold. Even though I've got my dry suit on, I've actually got a sweater underneath this and a couple of pairs of thermal, like long johns. I'm starting to get a little bit cold, finally. I've been out and doing this for a while. And at first very warm. Now the winds begin to shift around and you're getting a little bit more of that cold air. Yeah, starting to feel it.
All right, that was a look back. I mean, from tropical-like air to almost a fall-like air. A lot of cold air encountering what's left of Fiona as it continues its way further to the north and east. We do, again, I want to remind everyone you're watching us on social media or on our Storm Center app, which is great, as well as on our television channel. We've had an outpour of questions from you, which we absolutely love to see. So thank you for sending those in. I have one, Kevin, for you from Christopher Olson, and that is any word from the people or the horses on Sable Island?
Well, the horses haven't tweeted us yet, so we don't have an update from them. But there are a few people that are riding out the storm on the island. They haven't been able to touch base quite yet. I'm sure they don't have access yet either. But the good news is they are definitely in the clear now. The worst is over. The rain's cleared. The winds have now eased. And the station there, the worst wind gust was actually only 130 kilometers per hour, which is a bit of a relief, because here's a look at the satellite from overnight as the eye tracked just to the west, only about 80 kilometers from the island. And that's almost a worst case scenario, because on the right side of the eye is when you could get the biggest waves, the strongest winds, and the heaviest rain. Not that the rain is the biggest issue for the horses, but we will. I personally have an interest in this, and I want to get an answer as soon as possible on their status, because another thing that a lot of people won't think about is the horses rely on the rainwater to get gathered between the sand dunes, and that's why they have little marshes, and that's where they can drink. But if all those get flooded with salt water, now they have to wait till the next storm to basically replenish those and push the salt water out. So even if they can ride out the storm on the tops of the highest dunes, it's a matter now we have to get some water to them. So maybe if the Canadian Coast Guard is listening, maybe we can get some water barrels out to them.
Some water barrels. Thinking of the horses, thinking of everyone who has been impacted and continues to be impacted greatly by Fiona. We're showing you some file footage of what has been captured over the past, less than 12 hours in Nova Scotia. Flooding waters, again, the risk of localized flooding, flash flooding, still on the table for several communities, especially as we continue to track Fiona as it moves further to the north and east. Many areas suffered major damage when it comes to uprooted trees, again, down power lines. We're slowly starting to see those power outages being restored in some areas across western Nova Scotia, which is great news, Kevin. Prince Edward Island will have an update coming soon, but overall 95% of the area without power.
Yeah, over 5,000 customers, and you think about maybe 4 people per customer, since there aren't many industrial places that will be counting as a customer. We could probably say between 1.5 and 2 million people are without the power there.
And that was
look at those shortages, and you see how fast those sparks are flying across. So that is what we dealt with through the overnight, and then it was surprising there, those lights didn't even go out. So hopefully we don't have to deal with multiple days for most areas. So sure, some of those smaller locations will have to wait it out a bit, but it's almost reminiscent of that derecho we had back on the May long weekend in Ontario, where some of the smaller communities didn't get power back for almost a week. Hopefully we don't have to wait that long, since we do have a lot of help again coming from Quebec and Ontario to bring the power back.
And Kevin, when we talk about power outages, I mean, it's never fun to have your power cut, especially for several days in a row. But I mean, we're at that time where it's not extremely cold, it's not extremely hot, so you're not in desperate need of, say, an air conditioning or a heater. So, I mean, at least that is the silver lining. We're, again, fingers crossed, hoping for the best when it comes to restoring this power to everyone across the region. We now have an update. Let's loop you back in, Kabir, with the ongoing social media outlets.
That's right, actually. So as we're talking about the situation that's happening in Port aux Basques, of course, in the Burn Islands as well, the Newfoundland RCMP has actually sent out a public advisory, and this is saying for residents to refrain from risky behavior, including taking pictures or videos in areas of flooding and ocean waves. It's not safe, especially as we get very compelling images. I definitely will say that we are going to display some of these images, but going forward, we're urging all residents, of course, please be careful. There is an unconfirmed report of somebody being swept out to sea in this weather as well, and a lot of this is unpredictable, so please be very careful going out. Now, the first one is actually in Pointe de Chêne. It's the wharf underwater here. You can see here it's quite deep, and then it does shallow out, but that's usually all drivable, or walkable rather. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what Michael King has posted, and this is from the Burnt Islands. So this is the type of footage that we're talking about. If you're getting out to take these images, please don't do this. Going forward, of course, but let's use this for the purposes of informing everyone as to what is going on. So we're seeing widespread storm surge that's pulled out a number of structures, destroying a number of structures as well. And we have seen quite a number of homes impacted here. Let's take a look at this. These homes and sheds and cottages all impacted now. Burnt Islands are under a state of emergency. That's a situation that continues to evolve here. And I'm just going to go ahead and load up this here for you as well. So that's that pier once again. But again, very compelling footage. But please urge caution if you do go outside. There's quite a number of houses that have lost their foundation, and as that water comes in beneath, it's really pulling out a lot of the structure and a lot of the anchor as to what those homes were clinging on to land with. And those high winds definitely not helping the situation. Speaking of high winds, how is that situation right now? Jesse and Kevin, we're very close to wrapping up this live stream, of course, but we continue to bring you this coverage. So how's it going out there?
I mean, the winds are still clocking in at incredible speeds. The gusts have been very isolated, as they are in nature. Kabir, I do want to ask you one question while we still have you.
Absolutely.
I know you're a huge cruise ship guy, and you're all about the boats. There's been a lot of vessels out through the Gulf, through portions of the Atlantic, as Jacqueline mentioned, in and around Prince Edward Island. Have you been monitoring any of the cruise ships? I know when Fiona was down in the Caribbean, you were closely monitoring where these vessels were. And again, I want to also touch base on flight cancellations, flight delays, all of that coming in and out of Atlantic Canada.
Great. So let's break that down a little bit, actually. That's good that you asked that. So first of all, yes, I'm very up to date as to what's going on in terms of our maritime friends out on the waters. It's always in the best interest of any captain of any vessel to be away from this weather, because it's going to cause damage to the actual ship and it's going to make everybody sick. So for the most part, there have been a few cruise ships that have changed their itineraries based on this weather. There have been ships that have been caught in it, cruise ships rather, because they do try and avoid that. But for the most part, there have been a number of itineraries, specifically New York to Bermuda. A couple of cruise ships have deviated. I know there's a few off the coast right now, of course, dealing with seas like this, but further out to try and avoid the storm track. In terms of flights, Jesse, well, we're looking at clear skies in terms of aircraft over Nova Scotia and much of Atlantic Canada, except for very high-level aircraft doing transatlantic flights, but no departures or arrivals going into Halifax Airport. The airport remains closed with flights canceled through until about tomorrow morning. Around the 10 to 11 o'clock hour is when we see those first flights coming in. So if you're planning on traveling, if you need to get there or you're worried about family, right now aviation is not the way to get there. Of course, we urge you to seek caution about if you do choose to do that. And of course, check with the air carrier yourself. Go to your airline's website in order to make sure what your flight status is. But overall, we're going to try and avoid that weather if you're in an airplane or a ship. And I'm sure the people that are out there have really dealt with quite a bit of that weather, including that sail drone. Did you see that footage? That unmanned vessel that went into, it was incredible footage. I don't think I've ever seen anything
Flying
like it.
into the eye of a hurricane. I've seen some of these sail drones. I mean, they're absolutely incredible. What technology or how far technology has come is just insane, if you ask me. It helps us also better understand these weather systems going forward and really give a cool glimpse of the meteorology and the formation of these cyclones. Kabir, you asked about the winds. Let's talk about those. Let's talk about what we have been seeing and where these winds are headed in terms of the intensity and the direction.
Well, this is a good representation of how this was just Atlantic Canada direct hit, because when you look at the bookends, Fredericton, St. John's, pretty major cities, both well below wind warning criteria. So if you're flying into one of those two, you likely won't be delayed. Moncton, Halifax, Sydney, Charlottetown, definitely a different situation. And I was a little jealous of you yesterday, Jesse, because you got a tweet from Mark Methot, the former NHL player, asking your opinion if he should cancel his flight to Fredericton.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't too sure exactly who that hockey player was, full disclosure, but I was flattered because, I mean, I love to give meteorology-related advice to anyone. I mean, Twitter is a great outlet for any weather-related questions. It's a great news outlet as well. We love when you send in your footage when it comes to active weather, whether it's, I know, a sunny day or a very stormy day, only if it's safe to do so. But I mean, we gather so much footage from our social media outlets. You must tag the Weather Network. So at Weather Network, please, if you are sending in any footage on Twitter or Instagram, I mean, you're watching us on YouTube potentially, the outpour and the reach that you have been giving us here to update you and continue to update you and keep you safe has been, I mean, completely appreciated. And I mean, it makes us really want to be here and do our jobs no matter what time of day, right, Kabir? I know it was an early day and a very late day for many of us over the past 24, 36 hours. All of our field members still out there in the thick of it. Okay, a little bit of an audio issue. I know a lot of our mics have died throughout this live stream because it has been ongoing, Kevin, throughout the early part of the morning and late last night. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, wherever you continue to watch us, please be sure to touch base again throughout this weekend. We'll keep you updated with all Fiona-related topics.